Truth in His Art. I am your host, the incomparable Rob Lee. I like to give myself new superlatives, new details. Today, I'm back in Philly for an interview with a writer, performer, and creator from Storrs, Connecticut. Storrs, Connecticut. Huh.
Yes, indeed.
Currently based in Philadelphia, he is the author of Thoughts and Prayers, a full-length book, a book-length sequence of poems centered around gun violence in the United States. Please welcome Owen Elphick. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And, I think, as I gave that and I fumbled through that introduction, because I got to be honest about it.
It's all good.
I see that there are, you're a multi-hyphenate. You have multiple things. So it's not just writer, not just performer, not just poet, not just creator, but you're doing multiple things and each one gets their due. So before we kind of dive into your work and the thinking that goes into it, I want to ask you something that either you're going to be terrified of or you're going to go on for a while about. I want you both. I want you to share your story. Give us the Owen Elphick story. Could you tell us your first art experience, any early writing, some of your influences, things of the sort?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with regards to the writer, being multi-hyphenate, writer, performer, and creator are the broadest possible terms I've just managed to find for all the different things I do, because it's a lot. But yeah, I mean, I sort of consider myself a writer first. I guess my sort of first experience with writing was actually, it was even before I could even write. I mean, my parents always read to me when I was a kid. I grew up in a house with a lot of appreciation for books, and I loved reading when I was young, and had a really insatiable love of reading. And I have a very distinct memory of being in, must have been kindergarten. I think I must have been 5. And I was reading a picture book. I don't remember what the book was. I just remember there was a ballerina in it. I was reading this this picture book about a ballerina, and I remember getting sort of hit with a realization of oh, this is what I want to do. I want to make this. Yeah. Or more broadly, I want to give people the kind of experience of wonder that I'm getting through reading this. Yeah. I want to sort of be able to do that, and that's what I want to be. And then I sort of was I defined myself as a writer pretty strongly throughout most of my childhood when I was young. And again, at the point at which I was I want to be a writer for the first time, I couldn't write. I didn't I literally wasn't able to. So what I would do was I would take pieces of printer paper, and I would fold them over into books, into little books. I'd staple them together, right? I would do that whole thing. Sure. And then I'd draw pictures in, but then I would dictate the story to usually my father. It was usually my dad who would have to write out whatever story was coming to my mind and that I wanted sort of
Dad,
put
take
out.
This note.
Yeah. Sometimes it was a teacher when in kindergarten, preschool, and then I learned to actually write for myself, and then I could stop putting on there. But yeah, but I was always as a kid really drawn towards making up stories and playing pretend, and then writing was sort of the first form where I was able to channel that into a specific dedicated thing that had sort of drive behind it, and purpose. And then as I got older, I just sort of found that there were so many other ways to be a writer, and that writing took so many other forms than I had sort of initially thought. When you're a kid, you're oh, this picture book, or oh, this middle grade fiction read. This is sort of these are the only things I'm reading, so this is the only thing there is. But then I got older and found out that TV shows were written, right? That there was a person writing the dialogue that the actors were saying, that there was a writing process that went into making songs, that plays were written, that all these things, and I think that led, as I got older and my interests sort of diversified, I kept just finding sort of new things to be excited about, and sort of new ways to focus and channel that writing. Poetry was definitely a big one. When I was I would have started writing poetry in a more concentrated way when I was in middle school, because there was an assignment to do that, and but I found it at the time to be like a very good way to like release a lot of the angst and
that teenage angst is
oh my goodness
is always there. And I will say that I did a lot of writing, like writing as in rapping, writing short stories, things of the sort. When I was in like high school, like
absolutely.
like being a teenager, not quite like. Like early high school, like sophomore, maybe up to junior, but really, just having different thoughts and processing like different things that you're experiencing, just different changes you're seeing, socializing with so many different people who are experiencing their changes as well in life, and just like getting it down on paper.
Yeah, and pouring that out.
I don't want to look forward to like looking at any of those old books.
Well, I think that, there's definitely a lot of stuff that I wrote when I was young that I wouldn't like put out or stand by now, but I still am proud of that, and I'm glad that I did it. And I think that process of creation, no matter what you're making, it like is still very meaningful and still leads to a lot of to good places down the line. And yeah, I mean, so I was in school, like with poetry, I did a lot of poetry sort of in terms of the writing focused stuff, like late middle school going into high school. When I was in high school, I participated in this thing called Poetry Out Loud, which is sort of like a national competition. Nice. Where people recite poetry. It's not your own poetry. You find like it's up to 3 poems that have been written by other people, and then you have to memorize it and then recite it. Yeah. And then you're judged on your performance and how well you recite the poem and stuff. And I did it my junior year of high school, and I ended up being state champion for my state, for Connecticut. And then I went on to the nationals and ended up being in sort of the finalists there. I think it was like the top 9 people. Yeah. And then I didn't win, but it was like it was because it was my first time doing it. It was a very like sort of wild roller coaster experience of like going through this competition process and then having a lot of opportunities then extended to me after that for my own poetry, and being able to sort of focus on my own poetry and have people elevate that and publish that, and that was really cool. The other thing when I was in high school was I was also just like a huge theater kid. Okay. I was a choir kid and I was a theater kid, and being in theater, acting, but also like I wrote a play that I directed my senior year of high school. I was very sort of focused on sort of doing all the sort of different bits and elements that came with that, and then like. Towards the end of high school, going into college, I sort of fell in love with hip hop, and I'd done songwriting for a while. When I was in like 4th grade, I wrote like the lyrics to 2 of the songs we did for like our school musical. Okay, and that was like a whole thing. So like I'd done songwriting for a little while. I did songwriting in middle school, and I definitely thought of myself. In terms, I definitely thought of like writing lyrics and writing songs as like an extension of the writing, but that I think took on sort of a bigger focus and form with finding rap and discovering a passion for that. And when I was for a little while I was like, there's no way I can possibly be a rapper. That's ridiculous. I'm just going to write these for myself and keep it to myself and not sort of do that in a real way. But then I got to college, and I would have been halfway through college, like would have been junior year. I sort of joined / sort of helped build back up from the ground up an organization called the Hip Hop Society, which had sort of existed in my freshman year, but then died when the people running it graduated, and then a new group of students decided to bring it back, and they recruited me, and I was very sort of involved for like the last 2 years I was at college with that organization, which involved like a lot of building the organization up and a lot of sort of production stuff and things like that, but also, we were making music, and I was recording some of that music and being on some of that music. And that just led down to me making my own music and releasing that. And I've been working on that. the sort of main project I'm in the middle of right now is finishing up a sort of a full-length body of solo music,
nice.
Which I'm scared to call an album, but I guess is an album and should be coming out later this year. So yeah, that's sort of like, but also in college, in addition to the rap music, I was also doing plays still. I was still, doing theater. I was in an a cappella group. I was writing. I went to school for writing. I was a creative writing major. I Thoughts and Prayers.
Yeah.
My sort of poetry book that you mentioned, that was published my last semester at Emerson by an organization that's based at Emerson called Wilde Press, who it's student run.
Yeah.
And they publish student works at Emerson of like 50 to 80 pages, and like make these like little books, and then all the proceeds for that go toward charity. And that was a thing that I had, because I was in the writing program and like around writing people, I had sort of had my eyes set on, I want to get something published by them since I was a freshman and had submitted to them multiple times, but my last semester at Emerson, I was doing that. So I'm definitely a person who I've described it like to other people and to my therapist, right? As I'm definitely someone who's inclined towards like having a lot of things on the stove at once, usually more than I can handle. Yeah. But like just doing a lot of things at once and having my sort of interest and passion for creativity, like going in a lot of different directions. And I think, again, like the sort of best summation I have for it is, again, like I'm a writer first. I love writing. And again, like I write a lot of different things. I also love performing, and I love like taking the stuff I've written, or sometimes the stuff that other people has written, and performing it and bringing it into a space where I can sort of share it live with other people. And yeah, I just, again, more broadly, I love creating, and I love like making stuff with other people and with myself. And I think, like, again, that sort of playing pretend aspect of it is very much at the root of it for me. Is like I like that. I've always sort of loved being able to sort of play pretend. Like I think as an adult, I'm sort of trying to do what I did when I was a kid in terms of playing pretend and making up stories. But now it's just in a different sort of context and in different forms, and in some situations for money. I'm not making a lot of money doing it right now, but yeah.
But I think that's the thing that I think a lot of creatives share, like, being able to kind of tap back into, some of that like almost childlike wonder or what have you of like, I just want to create, man. And when the money component, which is a necessary conversation, is brought in, I'm like, I don't want to do it, but you got to, because paint costs things, paper costs things, rent costs money.
Absolutely. And it's definitely been a thing I've been like struggling with and thinking about more this year, is artists deserve to be paid for their work. I think the other big piece of it, right, is like, I don't think that we may get into this into the conversation later on, but it's like, I think our society does a very bad job of supporting artists and supporting art and providing resources for art. And I think, broadly speaking, society doesn't really see art as real work. And I think that can lead to a lot of problems in terms of, feeling, so often like doing creative stuff and doing art can be framed as a thing that people are only allowed to do as like a hobby or as a side thing.
It's a discretionary income thing that people kind of look at it as, and which kind of brings it up to this question that I have. And I think I have an answer already based on what you said, but so I'm going to frame it a little differently. Why does human creativity matter? Like, why is it important? You go into a community or what have you. Obviously, like Philadelphia is known for its murals, its public art, things of the sort. Sure. And I think, from my standpoint, and I'll let you chime in here, but I think from my standpoint, you go to a place that doesn't have any art, that you can't see anything, it just looks a little too sanitized, looks a little too banal. I'm like, I don't think anybody's here I want to hang out with. That's literally my thinking.
No, for sure.
And you go to a place that looks unique, has design, and you're like, oh, okay, what kind of people are here? Let me investigate. Let me explore. I think art leads to exploration. It leads to conversations. But to your point that you were touching on, if we're not funding that sort of thing and that sort of creativity, then we're kind of cutting it off. But I'll digress.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, my opinions on this change all the time, right? But
Sure.
I think ultimately what I'm settling on these days is like human creativity matters because survival is insufficient, right? It's not enough for us to just survive and just exist, right? Like I've been thinking about this particularly recently with the pandemic and sort of having to live through that and all the ways that that's affected, right? Like everyone, but also specifically creators.
Yeah.
I think, I think art and creation, like, is the site where a lot of people find what is worth living for in the world. And that can take a lot of different forms, right? Like it can be inspiring questions that we need to be asking.
Yeah.
It can be providing solace. It can be, like having difficult conversations, but it could also just be distracting you, or distracting is maybe the wrong thing, but like it could even just be giving you, something else to focus on other than the horror
It's a
of
respite.
the world.
It can be a
it's a
respite,
respite.
yeah.
It can be a place. Yeah, it can be a place of sort of soothing. It can be a place of wonder. It can be a place of awe. It provides like the sort of the substance and the meaning that I think allows a lot of us to continue on. And I think even people who don't create art, who aren't sort of engaging with art, definitely see that, right? Like everyone's got their TV show,
Yeah.
everyone's got their music they love, right? And that's stuff, I think that's essential for everyone, whether you're making it or not. And the other thing too, I think with creativity more broadly is like creativity doesn't just necessarily apply to art, right? Like human creativity like fuels, that's invention, that's
creative problem solving.
that's
I think
entrepreneurship, that's
Yeah.
cooking, that's
I think
it's-
we've bifurcated in some instances how we look at it. Like we start looking at it in silos. Like this is an industry, and it's an excuse not to fund people who are doing stuff until they've passed a certain like choose your venture like trial. Like now you can have some money to work on the thing. So like I think about this, right? When someone is working on, let's say, a movie, and let's say I've done all of these art movies, these art kind of oriented movies, these lower budget, but it's like passion project.
Sure.
And it's like, now I can do a Marvel movie, and you're doing a Marvel movie to fund the art project that you actually really want to do. And that's kind of the thing. We do it in a way almost that we want to connect commerce to creativity, but the people that have the resources don't have taste or knowledge of that area in many, or good taste at least in that instance.
And I think it's also a thing, right? Well, where like
That was really spicy, by the way, for me.
No, but you're not wrong. I mean, I think Marvel movies have their place, and I think art, I think that sort of creation is important too. But I do think there's this thing of like, so again, like bringing it back to I think a big part of the problem is we don't treat creativity and art like it's real work, right? We don't view that as actual labor that is that's worth paying people for in the way we do, say, for, I don't know, like lawyers or doctors. Not that those professions aren't worth that. It's just like we don't treat an artist. We don't treat artists who put the time into and the labor into making something. We sort of don't view that as something we need to pay people for regularly or give people sort of affordable jobs for. And that's because, like, right, as a broad society, we haven't invested enough capital generally into the arts. And what capital we have invested is concentrated in some very specific zones, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all funneled into Hollywood. It's, you don't get access to sort of the kinds of resources that would really allow you to make a living unless you're working on sort of very big projects or projects in very specific sort of sectors of the industry. And that creates, I think, like a scarcity model for a lot of us that makes it much harder for us to actually do what we need to do, because I think a lot of the time that can lead to, it can sort of distort your sense of why you're making the art and what sort of art you need to be making, and what matters in terms of that art you're making. This is all stuff like I've been thinking about a lot lately because it's sort of central, a lot of the central themes to the project I've been working on, to this album I have coming out. And like I think that scarcity model really makes it hard for us to feel like the work we're doing is supported, and that means that it's hard to then trust in that work. It's hard to do that work in a way that isn't, that isn't sort of split up and focused on, do I need to be like making stuff that the largest number of people were like? Do I need to be, aiming for like fame or virality? That's the big one for me that like I think is really tough. Is like so often artists, like the model of success that we present to people from like the youngest age is success for an artist as like, like doctors and lawyers are allowed to have just like a steady full-time job, and they're good and they've made it, and that looks like success for them. For artists in this society, we have always, maybe not always, but at least when I was growing up, like that was always framed. It always seemed like the only way you could have like a regular, proper job and be supported and be allowed to do your art was if you got famous, or it always had to be concentrated around this idea of celebrity.
It's kind of this thing where, because I got the piece of advice when I was younger, like I wanted to go into comics. Oh, don't pursue that. There's no money in it. And it's like, okay,
or have a backup job,
I think it's similar in this regard, where let's say you do an apprenticeship as a painter or something along those lines. That to me feels akin to when someone's in residency. You're not making the most money, but you're in this period where you're learning, you're having exposure. Residency is considered, something that leads you to where you're going, as far as like a doctor or what have you. As far as being an apprentice, you're just wasting time. Yeah. And we don't value that. And it's like, how do we do that? And I've juggled with that as well, kind of being in this space, being in podcasting and doing it for a very long time, right? And, having people who, and I try not to be petty about it, but, you get sensitive about your things. Like,
of course.
Someone, but you ever think about doing it this way? It's like, that's not what I'm doing, though.
Yeah.
Like, you ever think about scaling it or having a barbershop conversation? You want to do like the Breakfast Club, or you want to do something like LeBron is doing? No. Sure. I want to talk to people who are doing interesting things and really kind of get to their story, get some of the granularity, what's baked into the ideas of their work versus, let's just do something for clicks. And this is going to be petty. Let's just hand someone alcohol and have them talk the truth.
Right, exactly. Which I think, and obviously there's a whole other aspect of this conversation of like how the internet and social media have impacted the industry and the way we sort of consume and interact with art, right? Like it's not sort of focused around art anymore, is it? It's focused around content. It's content creation.
Yes.
And I think that's like another big piece of like, it makes it very hard to sort of know, what you ought to be doing and how you ought to be, focusing your time. I think about this with the music a lot, right? Like I have had with the rap and with making music, like I've had to spend a lot of time on social media, right? Yeah. Like I've had to spend because a lot of where the audience for music and a lot of the networking that you do, a lot of that is generated through social media. That's sort of the main place where you can sort of do that work.
That's how we got connected, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and I think that's I don't know if that's straightforwardly bad, but I at least, like, my brain is not wired in a way where social media is I'm not good at social media. Like, social media is not the thing I want to be.
I'm not either.
and even if it were a thing I were good at, like, it's not the thing I want to be focusing my time doing. I think a lot about, like, the amount of time it takes me to make a reel.
Right. Gosh, yes.
You know what I mean? And how, like literally sometimes like the hours that can go into that process, that I could have been spending making something, and right, but I spend that time on the reel, right, so that I can have an opportunity for anyone to even see the thing I'm creating, right? And so that's like, I think that's the hard balance, is like, you want to be able to generate an audience, and you want to be able to reach people, because and I think some people make art just for themselves, and they create just sort of for their own value, and that's perfectly good and fine too. I think that's great, but at least if you're in the position I'm in, I want to reach people. I want to have an audience. I want to be able to connect with people. I don't know that I necessarily want to be famous. I think for a lot of reasons that's a very dangerous sort of path to go down, and a dangerous thing to pursue. Yeah. But I do want to be able to have my art touch people, and for it to make a difference for people in the way that other people's art made a difference for me. And so then it's hard, right, like to do the work that's involved with reaching out to that audience while still remaining true to yourself as a creator and staying true to the work of creation. Yeah, it's hard.
So I want to tap on one thing, and then I want to move to this question, because I have a question about thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, for sure.
So I find, and you may find this the same way, where I think it's always this kind of, and you touched on it a second ago, it's always this sort of trade that we're doing for, whether it's resource, whether it's exposure you're trading, whatever that time you're invested in putting together a reel, whatever that time you're invested in being part of a cohort and spending a couple hours per week, you can be putting that towards something. You know, you make art within the time that's allowed, right? So if, let's say, one of the parts of like the actual conversation, I get a feel of the person, and then you probably noticed this. My questions start going out of the way, and I just start like kind of free jazzing it or what have you. And that's the way that ultimately that's what one is aiming for. But one of the hardest things for me to do is spending like 2-3 hours at times researching a person, coming up with questions that I think are insightful and I think are meaningful. And you know, if I'm doing a class that kind of, we might have some money for you after you do this 38 hours or what have you, or if you do this, if you do that, here's a hoop for you. We may be able to pay you for the time that you don't already have enough of.
For real,
it's a trade.
Absolutely. I mean, as a person who is like fairly existentially fraught on a regular basis, right? Like I mean, time is such a valuable resource, and there's just not enough of it, no matter who you are. And I think, so it's a complicated thing. Like, as a person who does a lot of different things, I never have enough time for any of the many things I want to be doing. You couldn't give me enough time for all of it. You know what I mean? There's so much I want to do, and there's so much that I feel like matters to me, and it can be very hard to sort of feel like I'm splitting myself so many different directions and not being able to.
You're horcruxing yourself.
Yeah, right. Well, and but yeah, a little bit, but I think it's like the problem is like, you know, yes, there will never be enough time to do all the things I want to be doing, but it's also, I think, a problem where like things are not set up in the first place to give artists enough time, right? Like, we're not, you know, like, it's like, should I be working on this reel, or should I be working on this song, or should I be working on this poem, or should I be working on this, you know, this book, or should I be working on, you know, there are all those things I could be working on, and none of them are paying me, right? Like, so there's that element of like, I'm already like split all these ways on things that are not actually paying my rent. Right, and so then I still have to have a chunk of time taken out to actually go to my real jobs and actually earn money. And you know, there's not. I like my jobs. I like the jobs I do for money. Like, I'm fortunate to be able to like work pretty good jobs. But it is right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like it's like we're so. You know, there's so many. You know, sort of. I think a lot of the ways in which the systems are set up do not. Enable people generally to live their best lives, but specifically in this case, like, I don't think we empower artists to feel like they can spend their time in the ways that matter to them.
It's something about that nervous, that anxiety-ridden energy that just makes the art so. Right. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, it's tough. I mean, I think particularly I struggled with this a lot too during like. You know, going into and going out of the pandemic, right? Like, before I went into the pandemic, it was my I graduated from college December of 2019, and that last semester I was, you know, working on an album and running an organization with the Hip Hop Society stuff. I was working for multiple literary magazines. I was working on a book. I was working on Thoughts and Prayers and trying to get that out. I was finishing up my thesis, both for my BFA, but also for the honors program that I was in. So that's like two completely different, separate papers I had to finish. I was also, you know, working my job that
and
paid me.
Living as a human being.
I was doing an internship that would hopefully lead to other. So I was going like a million miles an hour and doing so many different things all at once. And then I graduated, and then like 2 months later, the pandemic happened. And then I was stuck at home.
And that's why I think like having strategy, like I had this, you know, in doing this, like, you know, I'm up here doing 3 interviews today, right?
Yep.
I have one when I get back, and then a meeting for a gig that I'm doing, and then a meeting for 2 gigs that I'm doing on Saturday. And with the day job and all of that, and even putting it out there where, you know, I've mentioned this a few times, you know, we're recording this in November, and at this point, I have kind of an episode per day going out for the rest of the year.
Yeah,
and
I saw that on your stream. I was like, "That's crazy. How are you?"
That's just kind of what it is. And you know, when you're working at it, it almost turns into an obsession. The thing that you're working on. But and I want to move into this question about thoughts and prayers. But it's almost like anything that gets in the way of that, there's almost a certain degree of spite towards it. It's like, I want to keep doing my thing, like whatever it is. It's like, if I can get paid and I'm good, if I have like, you know, if I'm flush with Hot Pockets or whatever someone eats, I don't know if the kids eat these days, but if I have everything that I need, that's, you know, to me, if I'm a creator, if I'm a painter, if I'm an artist, I'm a writer, what have you, that's the cost of me existing to make this work or what have you. And it's almost like you have to have a chance encounter to find someone that is going to have that value, going to have that taste, it's going to have that ability to connect you to someone that might be able to find you funding, might be able to find you a grant.
I mean, that's a whole, I mean, there is always that sort of, right? And again, that's what happens when there is a scarcity model, right? You have to rely on luck to get what is viewed within the industry as a kind of success, right? It's like you have to be very talented, and you have to work very hard, and you have to get lucky. And the other, and I think the thing is, like, we shouldn't be having to rely on chance and luck that much. You know, we shouldn't be having to be so sort of.
And you have to be super ambitious too. Like,
exactly.
If you don't have it, like you know, being able to do this much content and having this idea, as I was, you know, telling you why I'm up here. Yeah. That to me, you know, 6 months ago, a year ago, I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't even be thinking about it in this way. So I need to even come with something that feels unique and having that strategy. And you know, as a person that's like, my day job, I'm in data, so I'm always thinking strategically to how do I make use of this 24 hours to try to get the most stuff done, and also having this thing in the back of my head. I don't know if you encountered this, but having the thing in the back of my head of, I'm not going to always be this ambitious, or my life isn't always going to be coordinated in this way that I can do 18 podcasts in a week.
Oh yeah, I'm terrified of that. I mean, I think I definitely. So yeah, I mean, like sort of what I was talking about with the pandemic, right? Like, it was like going from doing a million miles an hour to doing absolutely nothing, and feeling like I couldn't do anything, and not knowing how to do anything, and trying to reframe my relationship around work and how hard I was pushing myself and how many things I was making myself do and how healthy that was for me, and you know, and then I think the challenge coming sort of onto the other side. I mean, the pandemic is still going on, but coming into this space, right, where things are opening up more and people are going out more, and more things we're doing more things this year, and particularly for me, I've just been doing a lot more stuff. I have definitely been trying to find a way to go back so that the balance is a little more even, right, and where. But it's hard. I find that I slide very easily back into, again, putting too many things on the stove. I got too much stuff cooking at once, and not being able to focus on, and certain things are burning, and you lose track of certain stuff because the other thing is, like, even if we were well supported, and even if there was a good support system for the kind of stuff we're trying to do, and even if it was valued, you're only human. You can only do so much, and I think that's really hard when you are super ambitious and when you want to accomplish so many different things. And knowing how to prioritize your time, and knowing how to immediately, and also in my case, I think the thing I struggle with is, like, feeling like that time is guaranteed. I don't really have a lot of. It's very. I think the time we have here is very precious and limited, and I think that can make it hard for me to sort of reassure myself that, like, you know, you'll always have a chance. You'll have a chance to do this later. This is going to work. And to sort of your point about, like, I'm not always going to be this ambitious. For me, it's also a thing of, like, I'm not always going to be able to, like, I'm scared of, like, settling into a point where I'm just sort of stuck into doing one thing, or where, because of certain obligations or responsibilities I have to do this, and that's going to limit and cut off me being able to do other stuff that valuable to me. And to some extent, that's just going to be the reality of it. But I also want to be able to. I think it's important to know what matters to you and know what to prioritize and know and then be able to take the sacrifices that come in with, I'm going to spend my time this way. I'm going to spend my time on this thing, and maybe I won't have health care, or at least maybe I won't have health care as soon as I ought to. Right, like, and again, that's the other thing. Like, it's little stuff like that. Like, our country doesn't sort of have things set up in a way where sort of basic life is supported. Why do you have to get a job? You have to get a job because a job will provide you with health insurance. Why do you have to get a job? Because a job will provide you with health insurance, because we have a system set up in this country where it's almost impossible to get health insurance that is decent unless you're getting it through a job. And so, and that makes it hard. That's another pressure. That's another constraint.
Maintenance. Exactly.
And I think so it's not just an issue of, I'm limited in like one individual person is limited in this way. That's definitely a case. But again, I think there's also like big problems with the world we're living in and the society we're living in that makes those issues that would be hard for like individual humans harder. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that.
So in talking about an issue that we have in this country.
Let's
talk about thoughts and prayers a little bit. So, being that gun violence is is American pie. We love gun violence here because we
surely do.
Because we don't seem to do anything about it. And so why was that like subject matter theme so on that resonated with you, that you're like, all right, I want to put something together? What was the thinking that went into Thoughts and Prayers?
Yeah, I mean, I think so with Thoughts and Prayers, like, I started writing the poems that would end up turning into Thoughts and Prayers shortly after the Parkland shooting happened. So this would have been about 2018. I was in college and the Parkland shooting happened, and that was a very big moment. Right, March for Our Lives happened, and there was a lot of focus around the issue. And gun violence had been a thing that I had sort of thought about and felt very concerned about and connected to for a while. I grew up in Connecticut. I remember when Sandy Hook happened. I remember what a big impact that had, and sort of all the sort of stuff that happened there. But it was also stuff like, I think I sort of don't know that I love describing it this way because it feels a little too. Why did I write Thoughts and Prayers? Because I felt like I had to. It wasn't necessary. It just felt like I needed to write those poems for myself. Yeah. It wasn't. I don't know that I initially thought about it in terms of it becoming a book or in terms of becoming a whole thing. I just needed to have some way of sorting out my feelings around that issue and feeling like I could do something when, right, like in the wake of these mass shootings and this issue, it often we're struck with a feeling of like hopelessness, like there isn't anything we can do, like there's no way forward. This keeps happening. We keep not doing anything about it. What are we? So that was sort of where it started. Was I just sort of had to do it for myself, and then as I sort of dug in more, I found sort of, that it was turning into a larger project and turning into a book and turning into something that I felt I don't know about uniquely suited to talk about. I definitely don't know that I think I'm the first person I would talk to about the issue of gun violence. I'm not, I'm not a survivor of gun violence. I haven't witnessed any serious gun violence in my lifetime, thankfully. And I don't come from a place where that sort of was very present around me. But again, I'm from Connecticut. Connecticut is sort of where the gun industry in America started, sort of historically. Yeah. There was a period where Connecticut was known as the arsenal of democracy, right? It's where
wow,
yeah, it's like where Cult and all those sort of people like that sort of either came from or started their factories. There was the huge gun manufacturing industry in Connecticut, and the other piece of it, right, is like I have family, right, who are very protective, let's say, of their Second Amendment rights. I grew up around people who own guns and who feel very entitled to their right to own guns. Yeah. And, that was, I think, another piece of, sorting out my feelings around my family and their sort of connection to that side of the debate was another piece of it. And then the other thing too is I'm a young man. I was raised as a man in this country, so of course I had an obsession with weapons from a pretty early age, yeah. Right? Like I played with toy guns. I talk about this in the book. I used to collect sticks as a kid. For lots of reasons, but one of the ways in which that sort of stick collecting habit took form was I would collect sticks that were shaped like guns, that looked like guns. Yeah. I would turn them in my brain, right, in my playing pretend, like my imagination. I would turn it into this. This is a weapon. And right, why would I do that? And looking back on that, right, like as an adult, more, I was really trying to untangle like why I was raised in a way, like, and it wasn't, it wasn't my parents. Like, my parents were not at all endorsing of violence, and I think they tried very hard to shield me from a lot of that, and did the best they could. But right, you grew up in this country, and you learn, particularly as a man, right, that violence is the way that you have power. It's the way you have identity. I think for a lot of people, it's the way they find community is centered around instruments of violence and engagement with violence.
There should be an album cover, by the way. I mean, album name, Instruments of Violence.
Instruments of Violence. Yeah, that was. Yeah, it sounds like some sort of metal album. Yeah.
Here for it.
No, I think, and I think that was a thing I was thinking about too. Was so often I think the conversation around gun violence, right? It's always centered around these sort of mass shootings that happen. We tend to particularly sensationalize it and talk about it when it's kids, and the other I think the other major piece for me in terms of being inspired was to work on this and feeling like I had a connection and an impulse to write about gun violence was when I was in my freshman year at Emerson. I was in a production of a play called Columbinus, which is about the Columbine massacre.
It's middle school for me.
Yeah, it was, and that was a huge learning experience, and it was a very difficult show to be a part of for a bunch of reasons. Right. But it was I learned a lot about that event. In some ways we portrayed it happening. Like so there was an extent to which, as an actor, I sort of had to live through it or put myself in the place of someone in that situation. And so that was another thing that I was thinking about. And, the focus that we put on big mass shootings, particularly in schools, particularly schools full of white children, right? Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and then even some of the shootings that have happened more recently this past year. I feel like there is a tendency to sort of sensationalize that, right? And a lot of fur gets brought up around it, and everyone is sort of like, "Oh gosh, this is so terrible. How could this have happened? Yeah. This is how can this be happening in this country?
This is not who we are.
This is not. This is not who we are." And I that rhetoric, particularly when it was happening this year around some of the shootings that are happening, just incenses me to no end, because the evidence is very clear that it absolutely is who we are. And not only, again, it's like focusing on these big mass shootings when 320, I think, people die. I think it's like 320 people get shot every day in this country. And thousands of people die every year from guns. Gun violence is not a thing that happens with these big mass shootings where it's a regular, it's a constant in this country, right? Particularly in impoverished communities, particularly in places where people don't have resources, and I think that was another sort of big realization for me, and a real big thing to unpack in terms of working on the book, was in terms of, okay, how can we frame this issue, and how can we talk about this issue not as this sort of weird aberration that happens, right? Like and a sort of like horrible tragedy, like a terrorist attack, like a big disruption in the middle, but rather look at it as a thing that is ingrained in us, ingrained in our history, ingrained in how we are conditioned, how kids are conditioned in this country, and how we're all complicit in it, right? Like I think a lot about. I think that was another big piece of the process for me was, right, like the shootings horrify me, and I am, you know, I have a lot of emotion connected to when they happen, and there are horrible tragedies, and I feel very powerfully that they have to stop, and yet I'm still addicted to the idea of violence. Right, like I still have a thing that was trained into me that feels like, oh, you know, if I have a gun, right? It's in the movies we watch. It's in all sorts of media. It's in a lot of the messaging we send to people, very young and constantly. Right, like if you got a gun, then you're safe. You're protected. Yeah. You have power. And I think a lot of the time about that Nas song, "I Gave You Power," where he's like where he's like rapping from the perspective of a gun, and the sort of the chaotic nature that violence brings when we feel when so much work has been put into making us feel and believe that it will actually make us safer, that it will actually somehow secure us, right? Like people who talk about, you know, after these school shootings happen, right? Like, oh, the teachers need to be armed, as if that will, as if that will sort of reduce instances of violence when there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that that's true, and there's actually quite a lot of evidence to suggest the opposite. That was, I think all of those things sort of, led into why I felt really moved to write about it, and then it became a thing of I wrote enough poems, and I was like, okay, this is turning into like a thing. This is turning into a capital P project, and then again, like I said, like I was at Emerson at the time, Wilde Press. One of the things that's great about them as like a home for the book, and part of the reason I sort of wanted to submit it to them and have it published through them was that they, all the proceeds again go to charity. Yeah. I didn't really feel like with this project it was a thing that I wanted to like make money off of for myself. Sure. I was like, if I'm gonna, because another thing that I sort of concluded in the course of working on it, another thing that I was sort of thinking about a lot was like, what's the purpose of art in terms of dealing with political issues, right? Like, what is the purpose of art in moments like this, and can my art do anything, and does this book make any sort of real difference in terms of making things better? And I think that art is necessary to these kinds of conversations. I think we have to make art that talks about it, and there has to be art in order for things to get better. But art on its own is insufficient, right? Like in the same way, right, that this is where the title comes from, that thoughts and prayers are insufficient, right? At the end of that's what the title sort of takes itself from, right? After all of these shootings, people always talk about like, oh, we're sending thoughts and prayers to the victims, and it's like, that's great, like that. That's not a bad thing that you're doing that, but that is not but that is not enough. It's just not enough. It's not going to bring their kids back. It's not going to bring their family members back.
It's not going to untraumatize.
It's not going to untraumatize anyone. It's not going to break the sort of long ingrained cycles in this country of violence from being shifted, and we can't change those things. We can't break those cycles until we're able to look at ourselves and acknowledge the fact that again, like you were saying, gun violence. It's such an American. It is a uniquely American issue. People come here from other countries and are horrified and astonished by how much gun violence there is.
How many guns do you guys have?
And it is a very it's a thing that's very particular to us. And part of the reason it's very particular to us is that like the U.S. has a very like violent history as a country, right? I have some poems in the book where I write about like the Revolutionary War, and I write about sort of early instances of I think gun violence is about as ingrained in this country as like the repercussions of gun violence and guns being such a prominent thing in this country are just as ingrained in the U.S. as things like slavery are, or patriarchy. And I think a lot of people want to think that, that's a weird thing that this happened. Oh, this was a very specific bad instance, right? When someone gets, and I mean, in the case of racism in this country, right? Like, gun violence and racism are tied very closely, right? Like, a lot of the gun violence that happens in this country is black people being murdered by police officers, for example, within black communities, people being murdered by each other. Yeah. And I think that, and a lot of the rhetoric surrounding that also gets very tiresome whenever things like this happen, and people are like, "Well, look at Chicago." What?
So let's stop there. Let's stop there because we're going to go into it, and I know we're going to go into it because it's a lot.
I'm starting to rant. I just think to sort of sum it up, I just think that there's a lot of ways in which we as a country need to take we need to take accountability for the fact that these problems are more ingrained and more systemic than we act like they are, and that was a big part of untangling that sort of thing within myself. I think was a big thing that mattered for me in terms of writing the book. And
I appreciate you really breaking that down because I think it is important to understand what goes into it, and thank you for putting that together too because it's a lot to process. Obviously, you have feelings. You're very, very passionate. I don't know if is the word because I think passionate is a different word, but it's akin to that. That is something that's important to you. Having conversations around that and having awareness around that is important. So thank you for putting that together.
No, I'm passionate about it for sure, and I just feel like I don't have all the answers. Is the other thing. Is like I think that's the other thing that's important.
At least it's a conversation.
I wanted to have something that would start a conversation and allow me to have conversations with other people, and there are ways that I feel differently now in a lot of ways than when I wrote the book. That came out in 2019, and certain stuff in it has stayed distressingly relevant. Yeah. I went out and started doing readings again this year, shortly after Uvalde and Buffalo, and just because I felt like it was time, and I felt like I had to sort of try and contribute to sort of the energy that was built around it, but yeah, I mean, there's stuff in there that's remained distressingly relevant, and then there's other things where I'm like, maybe I don't know if I feel this way anymore, or I'm not as sure as I maybe was when I wrote the book about this, and I wasn't a whole lot sure when I wrote the book in the first place. And so again, generating those conversations and having those questions that can push us towards better solutions, either individually or I would love at a larger level. That matters a lot to me.
So I think that's a good spot for us to kind of wrap on the real questions, and I want to go into some rapid fire questions, and then we wrap up for the day. So, for sure. So the key of the rapid fire ones, brevity is key here. We always want to, don't overthink it either, because that's another thing people do. People get caught on like, what kind of peanut butter do I like? So the first one I got, do you have any hidden talents?
Hidden talents.
Yeah, like just ones you don't really talk about, but just like, I can really juggle. I'm really good at juggling.
I am extremely good at specifically Google Pac-Man. Do you know like the little Google Doodle that has like Pac-Man that they did for Pac-Man's anniversary like many years ago? I am incredibly good at it. I've been able to reach levels on that I think the average person perhaps hasn't. Nice. or at least that I am much better than that I really ought to be, considering all the other stuff I ought to be doing.
What is your favorite place to grab a bite in Philly?
Ooh, in Philly?
Yeah.
That's tricky because I'm sort of in and out of the city. I don't live like directly in Philly, so I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. I'll say there's a restaurant, for the sake of brevity. There's a restaurant on the main line in Bryn Mawr called Fellini's that it's like an Italian restaurant that me and my partner sort of found when we moved here, and it is a special place, I will say. The food is good. The food is good, but you really got to go for the interior decor. You got to go for like the vibe. It is. They've got like, I don't even know how to describe it. They've got like sort of Roman-esque statues and Christmas lights and cake boxes, and somehow it all works on the inside. It's just a very like particular immaculate vibe. Sometimes they have live music in there. And it's also like one of those places that you could tell is very much like a family-owned, like local sort of place. So yeah, I like Fellini's a lot. Shout out to them.
So this is the last question, and this was the one I said that was going to be ridiculous.
Oh, okay.
So I saw that you had a background in sword fighting.
I do.
So have you ever settled an agreement with a rapier?
An agreement?
And a disagreement.
I've never settled it. Not literally, no. I mean, so it's for context. I from the age of 11, I started fencing when I was 11. My partner also fences. Like I have been trained in a number of sort of forms of sword fighting. Some sort of like what you see in competitive fencing, and some a little more archaic, like rapier and dagger for sure. I've never settled an agreement with a rapier and dagger. I don't think I've ever had a real fight. But I will say I did, and this sort of connects to Thoughts and Prayers. Because I actually. That was another thing I sort of grappled with was like my love of weapons via sword fighting. Yeah. I write about that in the book, and I write about being given a rapier by my uncle who is a big gun enthusiast, and who like I would say I have a complicated relationship with that and with him. But he gave me this rapier as a present. And then there's a different poem that I wrote that didn't end up being in Thoughts and Prayers, but that was published recently by a group called the Under Review, by like an online magazine that sort of focused specifically on sports related writing. Yeah. And I was like, I'll submit some fencing poems. But I wrote this poem that was about me fencing him at a family Christmas gathering. Oh my God. Like he had brought some fencing gear that he had found in like a used store, and he was like, "Do you want to do a bout?" And then I like fought him on the driveway. And from his perspective, goodness, I hope he doesn't hear this. He doesn't even know about the book, so that's like a whole other thing. But like, from his perspective, right? Like it was a fun sort of thing to do. For me, I think it felt a bit more complicated when we were having that bout, and and I sort of explore that in that poem. So, if people want to go check that out, you can.
So with that, I want to thank you for being on this podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
It's been a treat to chat. And for the folks interested, could you share where they can find you at online, social media, website, all of that good stuff? The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Y'all can follow me. My website, where sort of most of my work is owenelphick.com. I need to update that, actually. I need to go. I have some new headshots I need to put in there. But you can find like most of my writing and most of my work on there. On social media, I'm at Owen Elphick, OwenElphick on both like Instagram and Twitter. If you're interested in following my music specifically, which I have like separate social media accounts for, just because it keeps it simpler. I'm at OE in poetry, because I go by OE when I'm rapping. So it's at OE in poetry, and if y'all want to follow me and check me out, again, I don't know when this is going to come out, but I do have an album coming later this year. I'm very excited about that. Got a lot of other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Hopefully, I think that's most of it. I'm also on Goodreads. If anyone wants to follow me on Goodreads, I work in a bookstore and I love books. So if anyone wants to follow me on Goodreads and check out my like reading adventures, you can do that.
So there you have it, folks. For Owen Elphick, I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, writers in and around your neck of the woods. You just got to look for them.
Yes, sir.